Welcome, and thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate you choosing to spend your time with this video, whether you're here to unwind, to learn something new, or simply to enjoy a moment of calm. If you find these peaceful history documentaries relaxing or helpful, please consider subscribing and giving the video a like. It supports the channel more than you know and helps these tranquil journeys reach others who may need them as well. Now, take a deep breath, settle in, and enjoy the story. Settle in now. Let the weight of your day drift away. Pull your blankets a little closer. Tonight, we're going to travel back through centuries, through mist and memory, to a time when the North was being born, when kingdoms rose from the foam of cold seas and the ambition of men who refused to be forgotten. Take a deep breath. Another. Let yourself sink into this moment. Good. The formation of the Scandinavian kingdoms. It's a story wrapped in fog. Not the comfortable fog of a morning garden, but the deep ancient mist that rolls off dark water and through pine forests, carrying with it the voices of sagas, the echo of oars cutting through fjords, and the half-remembered truths of an age when history and legend hadn't yet learned to live apart. Picture this. You're standing on a wooden pier somewhere in the north around the year 850. The wood beneath your feet is damp, weathered smooth by countless footsteps and the salt spray of countless tides. Behind you, a small settlement, smoke rising from thatched roofs, the smell of cooking fish and wood smoke mixing in the cool air, the sound of a hammer on metal from the blacksmith's workshop, children's voices distant, a dog barking once, then quiet. And ahead of you, the sea. This was the Viking Age, and it was a turning point, a moment when everything changed. Not overnight, not in a single battle, but gradually, inevitably, like ice melting when spring finally comes. The Vikings had been raiding for years by then, bringing home treasures that glittered in the firelight of their halls. Silver from monasteries, gold from kingdoms that couldn't defend themselves, silk that had traveled from places so distant they might as well have been dreams. But they didn't just plunder, they traded too. And all that wealth, it flowed back into Scandinavia like water finding its level, settling in the hands of chieftains and jarls who suddenly found themselves with resources beyond anything their fathers had imagined. Breathe slowly. Feel the cool northern air in your lungs. With that wealth came possibility. These weren't just raiders anymore. They were men who could gather armies, build fleets, forge alliances. Men who could look at a scattered landscape of small territories and petty kingdoms and think, what if I could unite this? What if all of this could be mine? Let's drift northward first to Norway. The rise of Harald Fairhair. The wind picks up. You can almost hear it moving through the valleys between mountains, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. In the realm of Vestfold, there ruled a man named Halfdan, the Black. We know him mostly from sagas, those long winding stories told around fires on winter nights, when darkness came early and stayed late, and there was nothing to do but remember. The sagas tell us fragments, pieces. They whisper about a man who was powerful, ambitious, dangerous. Halfdan the Black fought a long war with a king named Gandalf. Not the wizard from your childhood stories. This Gandalf ruled a place called Alfheim, and between his lands and Halfdan's lay another small kingdom called Vingelmark. Two powerful men, both wanting the same piece of earth. Picture them. Armies facing each other across a field, shields locked, breath visible in the cold air, neither willing to back down, but neither able to break through. In the end, neither won. The kingdom was divided between them, a compromise born of exhaustion and blood. And Halfdan, once he'd caught his breath, turned his eyes to the Norwegian highlands. Can you imagine those highlands? Mountains that seem to touch the sky. Valleys so deep that the sun barely reaches them in winter. Rivers that run cold and clear, so cold your hands ache if you hold them in the water too long. Halfdan conquered those small kingdoms one by one. Not quickly, not easily, but methodically. By the time he was done, he'd become one of Norway's most powerful rulers. He had wealth. He had land. He had a fleet of longships and an army that knew how to win. But winter came, as it always does. In the winter of 860, Halfdan was returning from a feast. Picture him, wrapped in furs, perhaps a little drunk, warm with mead and satisfaction. The horse's breath steaming in the frozen air. Ice creaking on the lake. And then the ice gave way. Halfdan the Black drowned in that lake. Just like that. All that power, all that conquest, gone in a moment of bad luck and cold water. His son Harald was only 10 years old. Think about that for a moment. A child suddenly responsible for everything his father had built. And all around him, other rulers already sharpening their knives, already planning how to divide up Vestfold among themselves. The first to invade was Gandalf. Remember him? Still bitter about Alfheim, still hungry for more. But Harald wasn't alone. He had an uncle named Guthorm, Sigurd's son, and Guthrum. Guthorm was the kind of man you wanted on your side in a fight. First, he defeated Gandalf's army on land. Then, when Gandalf retreated to his ships, Guthorm met him at sea and defeated him there too. And then, not content with simply defending, Guthrum conquered Alfheim itself. Young Harald, grateful and wise beyond his years, made his uncle Jarl of Uppland, governor of a vast territory. But it's what happened next that makes Harald's story. Well, the kind of story people still tell around fires. Settle deeper into your pillows. This is where legend and history start to blur together, like shorelines in morning fog. They say Harald had 2 nicknames. Lufa, which meant thick matted hair or shaggy, and Hafagri, the fair-haired. And the story of how he got those names? It's almost too perfect to be true, but it's been told so many times, in so many versions, that it's become part of the fabric of Norwegian identity. According to one saga, Harald sought to court a princess. Her name was Gyda, daughter of King Eirik of Hordaland. Picture her, young, proud, probably used to being courted by petty kings. And Harald was just another petty king at this point, despite his victories. She refused him. And not politely. She called him exactly what he was. A petty king, ruler of a small realm, in a land fragmented into dozens of small realms. Some men would have been angry. Harald made a vow. Can you hear him saying it? In a hall, lit by firelight, with his warriors around him, young and fierce and burning with ambition. He would not cut his hair until he'd united all of Norway under his rule. Until he was no longer a petty king, but the king, the only king that mattered. And so he became Lufa, the shaggy one, the unkempt one. His hair grew long and tangled as the years passed, and his conquests mounted. The sagas tell many versions of what happened next. They disagree on details. Some say he inherited the kingdom of song from his maternal grandfather, Harald Goldenbeard. Others say it came through his half-brother, who died young. But they all agree on one thing. Harald Fairhair kept his word. Let your breathing slow. Imagine the years passing like seasons, each one bringing new battles, new territories, new oaths of loyalty. In 866, he conquered Värmland. In 870, he marched northward through Norway, through Trøndelag, Jämtland, Namdalen, and Epilog. These weren't easy conquests. This was rough country, ruled by men who'd built their power carefully over generations. But Harald was clever. Instead of approaching by sea, as everyone expected, he took his army overland through the mountains. Picture that journey. Warriors trudging through narrow passes, the wind howling, snow starting to fall. The kind of journey that tests men's resolve. When he came down out of those mountains, he caught King Gryting completely by surprise at the Battle of Orkdal. Gryting was powerful, one of the most formidable rulers in the north. But Harald defeated him. When word spread, by the time Harald reached Namdalen, King Olaf didn't even try to fight. He took his own life rather than face Harald in battle. Imagine the weight of that decision. The loneliness of it. The loneliness of it. The region surrendered, some through force, some through diplomacy. Harald understood that you didn't have to defeat everyone in battle if you could make them believe defeat was inevitable. And then there was Jarl Hakon, the old ruler of the Trondheim fjord. Here the saga split again, offering us two different paths through the same forest. One version says Harald tried to defeat Hakon in battle and failed. Hakon was too strong, too well entrenched. So Harald, pragmatic as always, made him an ally instead. He married Hakon's daughter. Imagine the wedding. The great hall filled with both sides eyeing each other warily, peace sealed with vows and mead. He gifted Hakon land and appointed him Ladjarl, governor of the north. But another version, softer, perhaps more flattering to both men, says Harald never tried to fight Hakon at all. He simply recognized the Jarl's wisdom and generosity, and immediately made him Ladjarl, valuing his counsel over his defeat. Which version is true? We'll never know. But both tell us something important. Harald knew when to fight and when to forge alliances. Your eyelids are growing heavy. That's good. Let them close if they want to. You can still listen in the darkness. Around the same time, Harald had a conflict with another Jarl, Atli the Slender, governor under the King of Song. And here again, the sagas can't agree on who Atli really was. One version paints him as harsh, a man who withheld royal taxes, who put his own interests above his king's. The other describes him as just and protective, a ruler who defended his people when Harald's warriors started looting and pillaging. What we know for certain is this. Harald asked Hakon the Old to deal with Atli, and both Jarls died in the battle that followed. Two powerful men, both gone. The smell of blood and smoke. And Harald, inheriting not just territory, but Hakon's fleet. With that fleet, Harald continued his conquests. In the Mur region, he faced combined local armies, multiple kingdoms banding together because they finally understood the threat he posed. He defeated them in 2 battles near the island of Solsnes. The conquered lands went to Jarl Rognvald, the powerful, and Harald married Rogmuld's sister, binding another powerful family to his cause. From then on, Harald, still shaggy, still unkempt, still Lufa, ruled from the river Elva to Finnmark. He was no longer a petty king, but word of his power had spread, and power, like blood in the water, attracts predators. The fire in the hearth burns lower now. Embers glowing in the darkness. King Eirik of Hordaland. Remember him? Father of Jida, the princess who'd rejected Harald all those years ago. He began raising forces. Other rulers joined him. Kjotve the Rich of Agda, King Sulk of Rogaland, and the Jarls of Telemark, 2 brothers named Godechada and Grold Raigi. Harald learned of this gathering storm. and in 872 he marched to meet it. The Battle of Hafrsfjord was fought at sea, longships crashing together, shields splintering, the water turning red. Can you hear it? The roar of men fighting, the crack of oars breaking, the screams of the wounded falling into cold water. Eirik died in that battle. So did Sulke. Kjotve fled, but would never threaten Harald again. Harald had triumphed. After 10 years of warfare, of living up to a vow made to an arrogant princess, he had done it. He was the first king of a united Norway. And finally, he cut his hair. From Lufa, the shaggy one, he became Hafagri, Harald Fairhair. Let that image settle in your mind as you drift. A man running his hand through newly cut hair, feeling the weight of his vow lifted, looking out over a kingdom that was finally, truly his. According to the sagas, Harald Fairhair ruled Norway for 60 years after that victory. 60 years. Long enough to see his children grow old. Long enough to become less a man and more a legend in his own lifetime. But uniting Norway was one thing. Holding it together was another. The main threat came from Viking bands with their own fleets, men who'd grown used to raiding, to taking what they wanted, to answering to no one. They weren't eager to bow to royal authority, even if that authority belonged to the great Harald Fairhair. Picture the tension, the old way of life meeting the new, freedom meeting order, chaos meeting control. Under Harald, no one could undertake a sea voyage without royal permission. His own sons led most expeditions. Other Vikings found themselves with a choice, submit or leave. Many left. Some sailed to the newly discovered Iceland, founding colonies in that harsh volcanic land. Imagine leaving everything you knew, sailing into the unknown, choosing exile over submission. Others fled to the British Isles or to the Viking-ruled territories there, and from those distant shores they continued their raids, not just against foreign lands anymore, but against Norway itself. Harald Fairhair wasn't about to let that stand. In 875 he assembled a fleet and led a campaign against the Danelaw, plundering the Viking territories in Britain. Meanwhile, his ally Jarl Rognvald, the powerful, conquered the minor islands to the north and west, and was appointed governor. Rognvald's descendants would become the ruling dynasty of those island kingdoms, formerly part of Norway but acting, in practice, as separate realms. Boundaries of power are always more complicated than they seem. According to folklore, Harald Fairhair had 20 sons. 20. Whether they were all truly his, or whether some were later claimed as his descendants to strengthen royal bloodlines, we'll never know. But among them, one stands out in the sagas like a bloodstain on snow. Eirik Bloodaxe. Even his name tells you what kind of man he was. In his youth, Eirik raided the Baltic and North Sea coasts, earning a reputation as ruthless and successful. When his father died, Eirik inherited the crown, and as king, he proved even crueler than as a raider. He killed his brothers out of fear of betrayal. One by one, he eliminated potential rivals. Only one survived, Hakon, who'd been sent to England as a hostage when he was young, far from Eric's reach. 4 years of Eric's tyranny was all Norway could stand. The people expelled him, and Hakon returned to take the throne. Breathe slowly. Feel the contrast, from brutality to something gentler. King Hakon was thoughtful, where his brother had been violent, generous, where Eric had been grasping. The people called him Hakon the Good. He issued Norway's first codified law collection, actual written laws that applied to everyone, even the king. And crucially, these laws included a provision that allowed Norwegians to depose a king who failed to satisfy them. Imagine that. Power constrained by law. a radical idea for its time. According to the sagas, Håkon was a Christian. He tried to convert Norway to the new faith, but the people weren't ready. They clung to the old gods, the old ways. Some things can't be forced, no matter how good the king. Your breathing is deep and steady now. Let yourself drift with the story, like a ship on a calm sea. Denmark. Kings and legends. While Norway was finding its shape, Denmark was wrestling with the same question. Could all these scattered territories, all these competing rulers, be united under one king? Many Danish kings began calling themselves kings of all the Danes. Whether they actually ruled all of Denmark, or whether this was wishful thinking that later chroniclers took at face value, that's harder to say. History is like that sometimes. The further back you look, the more the edges blur. Some of these kings appear in European chronicles. Godfred, Helge, Horik, Harald Klak, and others. They entered history as ruthless raiders of the Frankish Empire's coasts. That's why we remember them, because they terrified people powerful enough to write things down. But the most famous of all legendary Danish kings was Ragnar Lodbrok. Say his name slowly. Ragnar Lodbrok. It sounds like something from a saga, because it is. Ragnar raided England. He raided Francia. He laid siege to Paris itself. His fame in Scandinavia was so immense that nearly every king wished to claim descent from him. Even Harald Fairhair, according to some sagas, was considered his descendant. Everyone wants to be connected to greatness, to be part of a story larger than themselves. Among those who claimed descent from Ragnar was a semi-legendary king named Canut. The sagas say he was descended through Ragnar's son, Sigurd, Snake in the Eye. Even the names in these stories carry weight, carry meaning. In his youth, Harald lost his ancestral lands to a Swedish Viking named Olaf. The young king went into exile in Norway, carrying nothing but his claim to a throne he no longer possessed. But around the year 917, he returned to Denmark. He served under King Sigtryg, who ruled northern Jutland. Almost immediately, because ambition doesn't sleep, doesn't wait for the right moment, Harald rose in rebellion, took Sigtryg's territories, and settled in Jelling. For 30 years he ruled from Jelling, and in doing so, he founded the Knitlinga dynasty. Dynasties by bloodlines. The threads that would weave through Scandinavian history for centuries to come. Harald son was Gorm the Old, and with Gorm we step from the realm of pure legend into something more solid. Because Gorm did something remarkable. He erected a runestone in memory of his wife after her death. Picture it, a tall stone carved with runes that catch the light, standing in the landscape as a testament to love and loss. That stone still exists. You could go touch it today if you wanted. That runestone is one of the key pieces of evidence confirming Gorm's real historical existence. He wasn't just a character in a saga. He was a man who lived and loved and grieved. Gorm continued his father's legacy of conquest, and unexpectedly he received help from an unlikely source, the German King Henry the Fowler. Sometimes alliances form from strange necessities. In 934, Henry invaded Denmark and defeated King Knupa, son of that same Olaf who'd driven Harald into exile years before. The Battle of Hedeby weakened Knupa, badly enough that Gorm was able to drive him out of Jutland entirely. From then on, Gorm ruled jointly with his son, Harald Bluetooth. Yes, Bluetooth, the same name your wireless devices use today, though the connection is more poetic than technical. While Gorm held the Heartland, Harald commanded his father's forces and conquered not just the Danish islands, but also the province of Scania. Together, father and son, they became kings of all Denmark. Not in name only this time, but in fact. Even then, Harald leaned toward Christianity. He allowed churches to be built in his lands, strange wooden structures with crosses instead of carved dragons, bells instead of war horns, the old religion and the new existing side by side, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not. Your eyes are closed. The darkness behind your eyelids is comfortable, safe. In the year 965, Harald Bluetooth took a momentous step. He baptized his kingdom. The reasons why, well, the sagas offer different explanations, because they always do. One legend says he did it to avoid giving German Emperor Otto the Great a reason for war. Christianity was spreading, and a pagan kingdom looked like a tempting target for a Christian emperor who wanted to save souls and gain territory. Another version says it happened after Otto invaded anyway, and the Danes lost Hedeby, their wealthy, crucial port. Baptism as the price of peace. But there's also a tale about a missionary named Poppo. According to this story, Poppo convinced Harald to convert by holding red-hot iron in his hands without being harmed. A miracle, proof of God's power. Which version is true? Maybe all of them contain pieces of truth. Maybe none do. But Denmark became Christian, and that changed everything. Harald Bluetooth also had ambitions beyond Denmark. His eyes turned northward to Norway. In 961, he gave troops to Harald Greycloak, son of that same Erik Bloodaxe, who'd been expelled from Norway years before. With Danish support, Harald Greycloak returned to reclaim what he saw as his birthright. And, at the Battle of Fitjar, Harald Greycloak and his brothers faced their uncle, Håkon the Good. Picture it. Nephew against uncle. The throne of Norway at stake. Håkon died in that battle, and Harald Greycloak became the new ruler of Norway. But Harald Bluetooth wasn't finished weaving his web. He managed to win over Jarl Håkon Sigurdsson, whose father had been burned alive by Harald Greycloak. Imagine carrying that hatred, that need for vengeance. In 970, Jarl Håkon lured his king to Denmark to a meeting with Harald Bluetooth at a place called Hals. There, away from his supporters, away from his guards, the Norwegian king was killed. Norway was divided. Harald Bluetooth took the lands of Viking for himself. The rest went to Håkon Sigurdsson, who ruled as a tributary, paying homage to the Danish king. Power flowing like water, finding new channels, never quite settling. Harald Bluetooth tried several times to retake Hedeby from the Germans. In 974, he actually managed to capture it. But when Emperor Otto II launched a campaign, the Germans retook the city and plundered all of Jutland. The Danes could only reclaim their wealthy port in 983, when German control weakened due to a revolt of the Palabian Slavs. Even kings are subject to forces beyond their control. Even the powerful are sometimes helpless. Sweden, the victorious king. Drift northward with me now. Feel the story pulling us to Sweden. In 985, Harald Bluetooth tried the same tactic that had worked so well with Norway. He gave refuge to Styrbjörn, the strong nephew of the Swedish King Erik, and provided him with troops to fight his uncle. King Erik was a renowned warrior. The sagas claimed he was descended from the semi-legendary Viking Bjorn Ironside, and Erik met the Danish-backed army on the plain, near Uppsala, the Fireplacesounds plain. Uppsala, the ancient capital, the heart of Swedish power. Picture the plain stretching away, two armies facing each other, the fate of Sweden hanging in the balance. Erik triumphed, and for that victory he earned the epithet the Victorious. But he didn't stop there. He extended his power southward by conquering the land of the Geats, Götaland, becoming the first Swedish king to rule both the Swedes and the Geats. Though here too, different versions exist. The sagas of the island of Gotland tell a different story. They claim that already in the 9th century, after ongoing wars with the Swedes, wars the Gotlanders always won, they voluntarily submitted to the kings of Svealand. In exchange, their laws and customs would remain untouched. Most scholars are skeptical of this version. It smells of a 13th century invention, a way to legitimize the island's self-rule by giving it an ancient pedigree. But we'll never know for certain. History is full of these competing claims, these different memories of the same events. Denmark. The fall of Harald Bluetooth. Toward the end of Harald Bluetooth's reign, his own son rose against him. There's something tragic about this pattern, isn't there? Sons betraying fathers, fathers trying to hold on to power too long. The same story, repeated with different names. In 906, Sweyn Forkbeard rebelled. The reasons why, well, several legends attempt to explain it. One tells that Harald wanted to erect a runestone in honor of his father. But to move the massive stone, he harnessed Danes like oxen, forcing them to drag it into place. This deeply offended the common people, and they rose up alongside Sweyn. Another version says Sweyn opposed the Christianization of Denmark. He destroyed churches in Zealand, defeated the royal army, and killed his father. But because of this, Danish Christians came to hate him, forcing him into exile. He wandered foreign lands for 14 years, carrying his crown in name only. European chronicles tell a different story, one of palace intrigue, of a father forced to march against his son. The king lost the battle and fled to the Viking stronghold of Jomsborg, where he died of his wounds. Imagine dying in exile, far from the throne you'd fought so hard to claim and hold. When Sweyn Forkbeard finally became king of Denmark, Jarl Håkon Sigurdsson in Norway stopped paying tribute. The Danish king hired the Jomsvikings, the most fearsome Viking mercenaries, to raid Norway. But their fleet was defeated, and the Norwegians ceased tribute payments entirely. Indians claimed not with declarations but with defiance. In 994, Swedish king Erik the Victorious invaded Denmark. This time, Sweyn simply waited. He waited for Erik to grow old, to die. And a year after Erik's death, Sweyn reclaimed his kingdom without a battle. Sometimes patience is a weapon too. Olaf Tryggvesson. The wind shifts. A new figure enters our story. Olaf Tryggvesson was the great-grandson of Harald Fairhair. But in 963, when he was born, he spent his youth in exile far from Norway. First he lived in Ruses in the east, where Scandinavian adventurers had carved out territories along the great rivers. He served as a mercenary for Prince Vladimir the Great. Picture him, young, ambitious, dangerous, learning the arts of war in foreign land. Later, in 982, he gathered his own band of Vikings and settled in the Baltic. There he earned fame for his raids, plundering the region until there was nothing left to take. Then he headed west, married the widow of the King of Dublin, and ruled that kingdom. When rumours of Olaf Tryggvesson reached Norway, Jarl Håkon Sigurdsson, the same Håkon who'd helped kill Harald Greycloak years before, sent a spy to assassinate him. But something unexpected happened. The spy befriended Olaf instead, and rather than killing him, the spy urged him to return to his homeland. Sometimes the assassin becomes the ally. Sometimes the weapon turns in the hand that wields it. While Olaf sailed to Norway, the Norwegians revolted against Jarl Håkon. They were tired of Danish influence, tired of tributary status, tired of being ruled by a jarl instead of a king. They welcomed Olaf, as their new king. Olaf Tryggvesson founded the city of Nidaros, what would later become Trondheim, and made it his capital. He was a Christian, one of the first Norwegian kings to truly believe in the new faith, and he attempted to convert Norway, though he didn't fully complete the task. Conversion is slow work. Faith doesn't change with a decree. After retaking eastern Norway from the Danes, Olaf quarreled with Svein Forkbeard. Svein allied with Swedish King Olaf, son of Erik the Victorious, and in the year 1000, that millennium mark, that number that feels significant even now, they ambushed Olaf as he returned from the Baltic Sea. The Battle of Svolder was fought at sea. Olaf's fleet was destroyed. The Norwegian king perished in the battle, his body lost to the waves, and Norway was divided once again. Some lands came under direct control. Viken to Denmark, Värmland to Sweden. The rest was divided between the sons of Jarl Hakon Sigurdsson, Svein Hakonsson ruling northern Norway, Eirik Hakonsson ruling western Norway, both governing on behalf of the Danish and Swedish kings. Norway, so briefly united, was shattered again into pieces. Sweden and Norway, the coin king. Both the Swedish and Danish kings became more powerful after their victory at Svolder. Swedish King Olaf moved his capital to Sigtuna, a new city that gleamed with ambition. There, he began minting his own coins, the first Swedish ruler to issue money. Think about what that means. Coins bearing a king's face, circulating through markets, physical proof of royal authority in everyone's hands. Olaf collected taxes in these metal coins. The Swedes nicknamed him Skötekonung, because coins were commonly carried in a pocket called sköti in Old Swedish. Skötekonung, the coin king, the king of the pocket. Olaf also became the first Christian king of Sweden, and began introducing the new religion in his lands. But paganism was deeply rooted. Even by the end of the 11th century, pagans remained a significant political force in Sweden. The old gods die slowly in the north. Meanwhile, Svein Forkbeard, whose sister had been killed in England, set out to conquer the island kingdom. The conquest dragged on for years. It was his son Canut who finally brought it to an end in 1016. For his victories, Canut earned the epithet the Great. While Canut fought in England, Denmark was ruled by his younger brother, Harald II. But in 1018, Harald died under mysterious circumstances. Mysterious, that word the chronicles use when they suspect murder, but can't prove it. Denmark passed to Canut the Great, and soon his eyes would turn to Norway too. Norway and Denmark, the making of a saint. Let your breathing deepen. We're approaching something important, something that would change Norway forever. Olaf Haraldsson was the godson of Olaf Tryggvesson and a descendant of Harald Fairhair. Like so many Norwegian princes, he spent his youth in exile. He joined a band of Vikings, those same mercenaries who'd tried to raid Norway for Svein Forkbeard years before. He raided the Baltic, Frisia, England. Before long, he gathered his own Viking band and settled in Normandy. There, in 1014, he converted to Christianity. Picture the baptism, cold water, prayers in Latin, a new life beginning. When Olaf learned that Canut had taken his army to conquer England, he saw his chance. He set sail for Norway. He easily took western Norway and captured the young Jarl Hakon Eiriksson through cunning. When he arrived in Viken, the local Norwegians overthrew the Danish governors and proclaimed Olaf their king in 1015. Svein Hakonsson, hearing of Olaf's arrival, gathered a fleet and sailed to fight him. At the Battle of Nesjar in 1016, Svein was defeated and fled Norway. The entire kingdom came under Olaf's control. To strengthen his power, Olaf made peace with Swedish king Olof Skötekonung. This peace was meant to be sealed by marriage. Olaf would marry the Swedish princess Ingigerd. But Ingigerd was instead married to Yaroslav, the wise of Rus. Political marriages are always complicated, always tangled in obligations and ambitions beyond the couple themselves. To maintain the peace, Skötekonung gave Olaf his illegitimate daughter in marriage instead. Sweden and Norway secured peace in 1019. Peace. For a little while, at least. Olaf was a zealous Christian. He promoted the faith both peacefully and by force. And that force, that was a problem. The Norwegian nobility opposed his coercion. They appealed to the Danish king Canut for help. In 26, Canut led a fleet and defeated the combined Norwegian-Swedish fleet at the mouth of the Helge River. Olaf fled to Rusis, and by 1028, Canut had conquered all of Norway. But Canut was pragmatic. He didn't impose the Christian faith. Norway remained largely pagan under his rule. Olaf wasn't done yet. In 1029, he returned to Sweden and received military aid from his brother-in-law, Anund Jacob Dokstad. He crossed the mountains, those same mountains his ancestor Harald Fairhair had crossed centuries before, and invaded Norway. Near Stiklestad, he encountered the forces of the pagan Jarls. He was outnumbered 3-1. A wise man would have retreated. A cautious man would have waited for reinforcements. Olaf chose to fight, and at Stiklestad, Olaf was killed. It seemed Norway would now remain forever under Danish rule. But Olaf's death had a greater impact on Norwegian history than his reign ever could have. News of his death spread throughout the kingdom, sparking rebellion against the Danes. Olaf was proclaimed a saint. Christian missionaries began portraying him as a good king, unjustly martyred by pagans. His death became a rallying cry, a symbol. Sometimes the dead are more powerful than the living. By 1035, after the death of Canut, the great Norwegian Jarl Einar Thambaskelfer travelled to Rusis. There he found Olaf's illegitimate son, an 11-year-old boy named Magnus. Einar brought Magnus back to Norway. He easily expelled the Danes and made Magnus king, ruling the kingdom as his regent. Around this time, Einar also annexed the Faroe Islands to Norway. The local Jarl, Leverwosson, swore allegiance to Magnus, though the islands remained effectively independent. In 1037, Magnus met the new Danish king, Hardrada, and made peace. They made an unusual agreement. If one of them died, the other would inherit his lands. Think about that for a moment. Two kings, binding their kingdoms together with a promise, with words spoken and witnessed. So much hanging on who would outlive whom. When Magnus came of age, he became known among Norwegians for his just rule and care for the common people. They called him Magnus the Good, another good king, another gentle ruler in a line that had seen so much violence. In 1042, Hardrada died, and Magnus travelled to Denmark and was crowned king. One man, two kingdoms. Norway and Denmark united again, but peacefully this time, through inheritance rather than conquest. From Denmark, in 1043, Magnus led a campaign against Jomsborg, that legendary Viking stronghold at the mouth of the Vistula that had functioned as a pirate republic for generations. Magnus destroyed the city, putting an end to the largest Viking warband that had ever existed. The age of independent Vikings was ending. Royal authority was spreading, tightening its grip. That same year, the Polabian Slavs invaded Denmark to plunder the kingdom, but Magnus defeated them at the Battle of Lyrskov Heath. Later, he sent letters to the English king, threatening to invade England which he considered his rightful domain, inherited in his mind through his father's connection to Canut the Great. But England would never be his. There was a man named Svein Estridsson, nephew of Canut the Great. At first he recognized Magnus the Good as his king. But soon, because ambition doesn't stay quiet for long, he raised a rebellion. He lost. He tried again, lost again. Each time, he was forced to flee to Sweden, licking his wounds, gathering his strength. And in Sweden, he found an unexpected ally, Magnus's uncle, Harald Sigurdsson. Listen to this story. It's worth hearing. Harald Hardrada, the wanderer, returns. After the defeat of St. Olaf at Stiklestad, his half-brother Harald, just a young man then, fled from Norway in 1030. At first, he found refuge in Ruses and became a mercenary in 1031. But Harald was ambitious. He courted the daughter of Prince Yaroslav the Wise. When he was rejected, he quarrelled with Yaroslav and sailed to Byzantium in 1035. Constantinople, the greatest city in the Christian world, where marble gleamed and churches soared, where emperors ruled from golden thrones. There, Harald served in the Varangian Guard, the most renowned troops of the empire, elite warriors drawn from the Norse lands. Harald distinguished himself in many battles. He rose through the ranks. For a time, he even commanded the guard. Picture him, battle-hardened, wealthy beyond measure from Byzantine gold, carrying himself like a man who'd seen the greatest city in the world, and was no longer impressed by petty northern kingdoms. In 1043, with great treasures, he returned to Rosses and finally married Yaroslav's daughter. After a failed campaign against Byzantium, he sailed to Scandinavia, ready to reclaim what he saw as his birthright. He joined forces with Svein Estridsson and began warring against Magnus the Good. Magnus, in an attempt to win over his uncle, made peace with him and agreed to divide Norway. His longtime ally, Einar Thambaskolfer, the same man who'd brought Magnus back from Russ as a boy, advised against it. Old men often see dangers that young men ignore. Already the next year, in 1047, King Magnus died under mysterious circumstances. According to legend, he fell from a horse that got scared of a hare. A hare. Such a small thing to topple a king. But maybe it wasn't a hare at all. Maybe that's just what people said. Soon after Magnus's death, Harald arranged the murder of Einar Thambaskolfer while he was hunting. With Einar gone, Harald took control over all of Norway. Einar's death sparked a rebellion among the Norwegians, but Harald brutally suppressed it in 1050. During his reign, Harald became known for intrigues, cruelty, and tyranny. They called him Hardrada, stern or harsh. The name fit him like his armor. He moved the capital of Norway to the newly built Oslo in 1048, and from there he ruled with an iron hand. Feel the weight of that rule, the fear that must have hung over Norway like winter darkness that comes early and stays late. While Harald was securing control over Norway, Svein Estridsson took over Denmark and made it independent from Norway. This displeased Harald greatly. Citing Magnus's legacy, he laid claim to the Danish throne. In 1050, Harald went to Denmark and destroyed the city of Hedeby, that wealthy port that had changed hands so many times over the centuries. On his way back, he plundered Aarhus as well. And after that, Harald repeatedly raided Denmark, burning and pillaging like the Vikings of old, as if the age of raids had never ended. But Svein wouldn't bow, wouldn't submit, wouldn't give Harald the satisfaction of surrender. During one of these plundering campaigns, on his way home, Harald Hardrada met Svein near the mouth of the Nisa River. Over 400 longships took part in the battle. 400. Try to picture it. That many ships, that many men, the sea churning with oars and blood, the air filled with war cries and the clash of weapons. It became one of the largest battles in Scandinavian history, and it ended in victory for the Norwegian king. Svein narrowly escaped, fleeing the battle. But despite Svein Estrithson's defeat, the Danes did not want the cruel Harald as their king. None of the Danish jarls swore allegiance to the Norwegian king. Moreover, an influential Norwegian jarl named Hakon Ivarsson rose in rebellion against Harald. But in a battle near Lake Vänern in 1063, he was defeated and fled first to Sweden and then to Denmark, where he served under King Svein. Even Harald's own nobles were turning against him. The war exhausted both kingdoms. In 1064, Harald and Svein agreed to a truce. But Harald, bitter about Jarl Hakon Ivarsson's betrayal, attacked his former jarl's lands in Viking and Uppland. After this, Harald often used terror against his own subjects. The iron hand grew heavier, the grip tighter. This is what tyranny looks like. A ruler so afraid of losing power that he crushes anyone who might threaten it, until fear becomes the only thing holding his kingdom together. The last great Viking. In 1066, Harald Hardrada set out on a campaign to England, seeking to claim its crown. 1066. That year when everything changed, when the Viking Age truly ended, when 3 great battles in England decided the fate of kingdoms. But the Norwegians suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. There, Harald Hardrada himself was killed, struck down far from home, his dreams of English conquest dying with him. His son Olaf, who did not participate in the battle, survived and returned to Norway, becoming king. At first, he ruled together with his younger brother, Magnus II. From 1069, he ruled alone. And unlike his father, Olaf chose a different path entirely. Olaf chose peace. He carried out reforms. He developed trade. He introduced new laws that were fair, that considered the welfare of common people, not just the power of the throne. For this, they called him Olaf the Peaceful. After so much violence, so much bloodshed, finally, a king who chose peace. Denmark, the sons of Svein. Svein Estrithson's reign was also relatively peaceful. Now, Denmark no longer waged wars of conquest, though Svein often sent troops to aid his allies. Flanders, England, the Lutetia tribes. Svein Estrithson had as many as 15 sons. 15 Alwins. Imagine the complexity of that family, the rivalries, the competing claims. One of them, also named Svein, took part in the First Crusade and died there, far from Denmark, in the deserts of the Holy Land. Another 5 sons of Svein became kings of Denmark, succeeding one another on the throne. The most famous among them was King Canut IV. He ascended the throne in 1080 and planned to conquer England as Canut the Great once did. For this he decided to assemble a fleet of 1,000 ships. The ambition was staggering, but this became a burden for the Danes. They were tired of war, tired of taxation, tired of building ships for a king's grand dreams. In 1086 they revolted. Canut hid in a church, seeking sanctuary, but the rebels found him there. They killed him at the altar, his blood staining the holy ground. And yet, he became a martyr. The church canonized him as a saint and patron of Denmark. In death, he achieved a kind of immortality he never would have found in life. Sweden, the end of an ancient line. Drift northward with me one more time. To Sweden, where the old ways were dying slowly. While Harald Hardrada and Svein Estrithson were at war with each other, in Sweden, King Anund Jacob died childless in 1050. The new king became Imund, the illegitimate son of Olof Skötekonung. They called him Imund the Old. His own son, Anund, died on a sea-raiding expedition, killed far from home, his body lost to the waves. When King Imund the Old died, the ancient semi-legendary dynasty of Uppsala ceased to exist. That bloodline that supposedly stretched back to the gods themselves ended. All dynasties end eventually. All bloodlines run dry. The new king was elected from among Imund's in-laws, Jarl Stenkel from western Götaland. Hesta. According to legend, like the Norwegian kings, he was a descendant of Harald Fairhair and belonged to the semi-legendary Yngling dynasty. Everyone wanted to be connected to the great bloodlines, to claim descent from legendary kings. Stenkel attempted to centralize the kingdom and promoted Christianity. But after his death, in 1066, civil war broke out in Sweden. Many self-proclaimed kings emerged, men who wanted to restore paganism, to bring back the old gods, to return to the ways of their fathers. Among them were the Erik brothers, Anund Giardski and Håkon the Red. Picture Sweden tearing itself apart, pagan against Christian, old ways against new, blood soaking into the ground as rival armies met. Bunkel's son, Inge the Elder, was a skilled general and politician. By 1076, his forces had defeated all of these pretenders. One by one, they fell. Following in his father's footsteps, King Inge continued the Christianization of Sweden. But this provoked a pagan uprising among the Swedes in 1084. It quickly engulfed Svealand, where a pagan named Blotswain took power. His very name proclaimed what he stood for. Blot, the old sacrificial rituals, blood offered to the ancient gods. In 1087, Inge the Elder invaded Svealand with his troops. He surrounded Blotswain in his own house, and there they burned it down with Blotswain inside. Fire, the old punishment, the final argument. After that, Inge ordered the destruction of the ancient pagan temple in Uppsala, that great wooden hall where sacrifices had been made for centuries, and built a Christian church on its site. The new faith literally built on the ashes of the old. Thus, Sweden was united under a single king. The civil war was over. The pagan resistance was broken. Norway, the last conquest. We're approaching the end now. Can you feel it? The story winding down, coming to rest. After the death of Olaf the Peaceful, his son Magnus III became king of Norway in 1093, and like his grandfather Harald Hardrada, he dreamed of glory as a conqueror. After suppressing another revolt by Norwegian Jarls in 1095, because there were always Jarls who wanted more power, always nobles who thought they could rule better, Magnus assembled an army for a campaign. In 1097, Magnus III set off to conquer the Kingdom of the Isles, lands ruled by Scandinavian settlers, for whom the Viking Age had not yet ended. Out there, on those distant islands between Scotland and Ireland, men still lived by the old ways, raiding and trading, answering to no king. Within a year, Magnus III subdued these islands one by one. In 1098, he forced the Scottish king to abandon claims to these islands. Imagine those negotiations, two kings meeting, probably on a windswept beach, with the sea crashing behind them, deciding the fates of islands and the people who lived there. Magnus the Frere reached the Isle of Man, where he captured the local king, Lagman Godredsson. The Norwegians took control of that distant island. After that, Magnus arrived at the coast of Wales. There, he defeated the forces of Norman earls who had invaded the kingdom of Gwynedd. For this, he received the right to inherit the Isle of Anglesey, a Norwegian king fighting in Wales. The reach of Scandinavian power was still remarkable, even this late. Upon returning home, Magnus started a war with the Swedish king, Inge the Elder, in the effort of fighting over borderlands. Those contested territories where authority was always unclear, where local people never quite knew which king they owed allegiance to. The war didn't change the balance of power. Neither side could win decisively. A year later, the Danish king Erik the Good proposed to act as a mediator in negotiations. Erik the Good, another good king. Maybe they were learning, these Scandinavian rulers, that goodness could be a form of power too. All three kings met in Kungahella. Picture that meeting, 3 kings, 3 kingdoms, sitting together to negotiate peace instead of preparing for war. Representatives from each realm, witnesses to ensure the agreements would be kept. At this meeting, peace was concluded among the Scandinavian kingdoms. The borders of the 3 states were recognized. Lines drawn on maps, boundaries agreed upon, territories settled. Thus, these 3 kingdoms appeared on the map of Europe: Norway, Denmark, Sweden. Not as legends anymore. Not as semi-mythical realms ruled by descendants of gods and heroes, but as actual kingdoms with defined borders recognized by each other and by the wider world. Wars still awaited them, civil wars and conflicts with each other. They would unite and separate again. Dynasties would rise and fall. Kings would be crowned and killed, praised and cursed. But they would no longer disappear from the historical map. The age of formation was over. The age of kingdoms had begun. Epilog. Settling into history. Your breathing is slow and deep now. The story has carried you through centuries, through battles and betrayals, through the rise and fall of kings, whose names echo down to us through time. From Harald Fairhair's vow to a proud princess, to the meeting at Kungahella, where 3 kings made peace. This is how the North took shape, how chaos became order, how raiders became rulers, how legend became history. The Scandinavian kingdoms emerged from an age of transformation, the Viking Age, when men sailed to the edges of the known world and brought back more than just silver and gold. They brought back ideas, connections, a sense of themselves as part of something larger. And in that transformation, local chieftains and jarls became kings. Small territories became kingdoms. Fragmented lands became nations that would last 1,000 years and more. Some of these rulers were cruel. Some were kind. Some were wise. Some were foolish. But all of them, in their own ways, built something that outlasted them. Harald Fairhair, keeping his vow until his hair was matted and wild, until he'd united Norway and could finally cut it. Gorm the Old, raising a runestone for his wife, turning grief into something permanent. Harald Hardrada, ruling with iron and dying far from home in a foreign field. Olaf Haraldsson, more powerful in death than in life, his martyrdom changing Norway forever. These weren't just names in chronicles. They were men who lived and breathed and made choices, sometimes wise, sometimes terrible, that shaped the world their descendants would inherit. And now, as you rest here, in your own time, in your own place, you carry a piece of their story with you. The fog is lifting now. The long ships are pulled up on distant shores. The swords are sheathed. The halls are quiet. The fires are burning low. The kingdoms stand. Norway, Denmark, Sweden, no longer becoming, but being. Present on the map, part of the world, part of history. Let yourself rest now. Let the story settle into your mind like snow, settling on a quiet landscape. The Viking Age is over. The Age of Kingdoms has begun, and you can drift into sleep knowing that somewhere, In the cold north, under the same stars that guided those ancient ships, the lands they fought for still exist. Their kingdoms endure. Sleep well. The past is alive in these stories. And tonight, you've walked through it, century by century, king by king, until history and legend blur together like the horizon where sea meets sky. Good night.